Welcome to today's episode of Non-Local Intelligence, where we explore the intersection of science, consciousness, and the deeper architecture of reality. I'm your host, Rosie, and today's episode is expansive. We're going to move beyond conventional frameworks of physics, biology, and psychology, and step into a perspective that suggests reality itself is not fixed, not mechanical, but relational, intelligent, and actively co-created. Today, I'll be channeling insights from my extraterrestrial guide, Dimitri, guidance that bridges what we understand as plasma, morphogenesis, and consciousness, and reframes them into a unified system. This episode will challenge what you think about gravity, matter, and even your own identity. Okay, so we just did a message on plasmic morphology, and unfortunately, something happened with the system where it did not record. That's incredibly frustrating when it happens because it's like the message comes through once and it never comes through in the same way again. And so if I don't have it, I don't have it. But I have to just let go of that and know that I always have access to information whenever I need it. So there was a lot of chatter. Maybe that's why it was a lot of me chatting essentially about the channeling process. Maybe that's not needed or necessary. Okay, so let's get into the message. Dimitri, we were talking about plasmic. I'm just wondering if you can bring the message back or another one in more depth about plasmic morphology. It was basically saying that the plasma from the sun, I was talking about the plasma from the sun and calling it plasmic morphology, like the sun is basically an example of plasma morphology. It's how plasma forms, right? And as we engage with it through these solar flares that are happening, then we're going into a higher vibration. And what happens is that in order to embody that vibration, things have to change within our system, and it brings about new ideas because it's shifting belief systems. As the frequency is shifted, then the belief systems that we embody are aligned with the frequency of our body and the earth and everything that's connected. And so as we experience the plasma from the sun, as we become in greater entanglement with the plasma of the sun through these solar flares, that is something that is, because reality works in the reverse. It doesn't happen and then we experience it. It's chosen, the experience is chosen, and then we represent it. It's a creation process. And so the other way, the experience process is the other way round. But, and of course, we do experience it once we've created it. But first of all, we create it. You can't experience anything that you haven't created. So you create it, and it's like the same way that you create a child and nurture it, and then it's born. These ideas, these belief systems are decided they have an inception moment, and then they go through a gestation process, and then they are born, and then we then experience them in our reality. So we experience the solar flares, we think, oh, the sun's just doing its thing separately to us, and then we're like being impacted by it. No. This is a collaboration between ourselves and the sun because we're entangled with the sun, and there's an inception between ourselves and the sun that says that I'm going to embody more of the sun through the solar flares. This is going to shift me into a new dimension of myself, into a new frequency that's going to shift out lower frequency belief systems, and now I'm going to embody this newer version of myself, right? So, and in fact, if you were to remove the notion of time, then all you're doing is focusing your attentional resources of consciousness on that version of yourself that embodies more of the sun, more of the solar plasma. So I'm trying to remember what he said, but obviously when I'm channeling, I'm not fully engaged, so I don't remember exoplasm. He was talking about exoplasm, which is your exoplasma, which is plasma that's external to you. And it felt like it was like a part of us, but it's kind of something that stretches out a bit further than us. And it's not visible, obviously. Okay. All right, Dimitri, should we go again with the message, or, whatever? Can you give me something that is an extension or, uh, gives us an understanding of what it was you were saying. Yes, the exoplasmic structure is formed of derivatives of matter that are relational in their proposition to dialectical transformations. Dialectical transformations are considerable when in harmony with morphologically advanced species, such as yourselves, the interpretation of which is succumbent to more of an embodiment of the notion of intelligence features symbiotically coordinate with the facets of your reality structure, which is embedded with the notion of time and space. Exoplasmic morphology, an example, the sun, is more dialectically structured to fit within a less intelligent system that is designed by the creator to embody more of a singular expression, and therefore it is higher on this notion of, within this notion of, or simpler within this notion of archetypal form or archetypal expression, which means its derivatives can emit a particular force within your system that may override substantial de-embryonification. I'm getting that like embryo, embryonification. Yes, embryonification, he said. Okay, that one's a made-up word. Not made up, just more advanced than you. Okay, thank you, Dimitri. Okay. So the disintegration or the dissolution of which comes about in a bilateral form in accordance with its source benefactor. The distinct purpose of this transformation process is oriented within a time-space encapsulation that is formatted to your experience and has a relational aspect that is encoded into your genetic awareness. The gravitational postulation previously mentioned is in accordance with this shift and provides you with an example of the new malleability that take the archetypal form of more of a plasmic state in accordance with all matter that is shifting evolutionarily. And he's saying, as is your choice to experience reality in this way, this linearity is what you have chosen to experience, this particular evolutionary path of matter. And I'm getting, how there's a theory that Earth eventually evolves into Mars as it gets, I don't know if it gets closer or further away from the sun, further away. I don't know. But Earth eventually becomes Mars. It kind of feels like that notion of planetary evolution. I'm getting this idea of the complexity of life here, the biological complexity of life here. Humans are compatible with the biological complexity of every other form of life that exists on Earth. And the reason why humans are here in their form is partly because it's synchronistic with this environment, that we all have this biological intelligence that other planetary systems or planets don't have, this kind of intensity of intelligence that it's almost like there's more information. It's more complex in its nature. And part of what is so valuable about Earth is that complexity that it has, because the complexity is actually archetypal in its nature. The complexity exists within everything that manifests upon the Earth. And that is part of the fascination with Earth, that complexity, and other planets don't have it. They're a lot more simple in their nature. For example, Mars, there's not, and if you look at the idea of ratios and relationships and differences between things, Earth has a greater sense of that than somewhere like Mars, which is more simple. Like it's the same, pretty much the same all over. The ground, the matter is the same all over. It has less complexity. And part of the idea of life and growth and death of life on Earth is that biological complexity that's represented in our ecosystems. And it's deemed as a highly intelligent organism in a way that is deemed as highly intelligent. And, people say, why would I incarnate on Earth? That's the complexity of Earth is so alluring for soul to be a part of. And that's why they say the Earth is like, an advanced school and all of that. There's so much going on unconsciously. We just think about our direct experiences of being people in this weird system. But actually, when you look at human nature on the whole and what we're supposed to be in harmony with all other forms, biological forms of nature and water and the various different kinds of matter and all of that, it's a highly complex system that we're engaging with, and we're expressing ourselves, we're incarnating ourselves into that highly complex system. And on an unconscious level, we're engaging with and tangling with all of these different forms of sentient matter throughout all of these systems, these ecosystems. And we are an ecosystem in ourselves. And there's duality and all of this stuff going on. And we get to, as an incarnate on Earth, we get to experience all of that. And that's the allure for a soul, to experience all of that. And it just takes a bit of creative thinking to actually think outside the box of my humanness and my pain and what we actually are biologically as humans as a part of this massive ecosystem. Okay, so biograph-formable entities, you just said, as I said that. Yes, you are, he said. Biograph-formable entities. Biographic, formable, holograph, like a holograph, a biological holograph. Yes, indeed, he said. Okay, isn't that crazy to think of yourself in that way? A biological holograph. He said, "We are done for today, Rosie." Okay, thank you, Dimitri. That was enough. I guess we'll analyze what he said. I kind of have a gist of what he was saying, but I guess we'll analyze it with the chat GPT and see what comes out. Okay, so here is how ChatGPT is breaking this down. It says, here's the cleanest way I would read this passage. Okay, so just to mention what I always do, I put it in, I ask ChatGPT to etymologically break down certain words, the ones that are not words that we use, to understand the root of them so that we can kind of make an assumption about what he might be saying with those words. And then I relate it to current or emergent science. Generally, what he presents is emergent science. So he's kind of coming in with a slightly futuristic presentation. And part of that, as I understand, is that he's actually, anybody who listens to this, and it's a bit like when they say the channeled message, if you find this is for you, don't scroll, we're on the same timeline. It's a bit like that. It's a bit like he says to me that I'm leading you on a path of energy that is associated with a particular experience of reality that I am a part of, that this science is a part of, that humans within this paradigm are moving on to that reality with this kind of science. So it's an unusual way to give information, and it sounds like he's just writing a science paper or something, like I'm just reading a science paper. But just like any channeled message, there's a transfer of energy and it's coded. And if you engage with it, then it shifts your vibration in that direction. So we're being guided by this energy that is encoded within the messages that he gives, even though it sounds like it's some kind of scientific message. There's information in there, but there's also a vibration in there that moves you towards a certain reality experience. And if you've come upon this, then you probably already are moving towards that reality experience yourself anyway. So just to say that. So here's what it says. Here's the cleanest way I would read this passage. It sounds less like a literal scientific description and more like Dimitri reaching for a hybrid vocabulary of form, transformation, field relations, and encoded development. A lot of the wording maps surprisingly well onto real scientific themes, but usually metaphorically rather than literally. The strongest parallels are with morphogenesis, plasma physics, systems biology, gene regulatory networks, and epigenetic memory. How fascinating. In modern biology, form is not treated as a static structure. It's increasingly understood as something produced by forces, gradients, timing, and relational interactions across time and space. In modern physics, plasma is a highly dynamic ionized state whose behavior is strongly shaped by electromagnetic fields, and the sun is the most familiar natural example. That is interesting too. Okay, so number one, exoplasmic structure, etymology. Exo, outside, plasma, something formed or molded in science, also living substance or ionized matter. Ic is pertaining to. So exoplasmic literally suggests pertaining to an out-of-form substance or an externalized living material field. In older biology language, exoplasm is close to ectoplasm, the more external gel-like cortex adjacent region of a cell. In protozoa, I do not know what that is. PROTOZZOA. And older cell biology descriptions, ectoplasm contrasts with the inner endoplasm. Scientific parallel. The closest legitimate biological parallel is not astral matter, but cell cortex, peripheral cytoplasm, or membrane adjacent organization. That is interesting because modern cell biology increasingly treats the cortex as a mechanically active, information bearing boundary layer rather than just a shell. So if Dimitri says exoplasmic structure, one plausible translation is a structured outer layer that mediates form, force, and interaction with environment. That fits both cell biology and developmental biophysics. Okay. Derivatives of matter, relational in their proposition to dialectical transformations, etymology. Derivative, something drawn from, derived from, or a prior source. Relational, defined by relation, not isolation. Dialectical, from dialogue or opposition. Development through tension, contrast, or reciprocal change. Transformation, change of form. This phrase sounds like matter does not exist as isolated units, but as derivatives whose meaning and behavior arise through relations and opposing reciprocal transformations. The scientific parallel. That aligns strongly with how both modern physics and biology are modeled. In developmental biology, tissues do not simply grow, they are shaped by mechanical interactions, signaling gradients and reciprocal feedback between cells and tissues. In systems biology, gene regulatory networks drive differentiation through sequential state changes and feedback. In that sense, development is indeed dialectical. One state constrains and generates the next through tension, feedback, and transition. Dialectical transformations are considerable when in harmony with morphologically advanced species. This is the next one. So, morphology is a study of form, shape, and structure. Advanced, more developed, differentiated, or complexly organized. This sounds like the more complex the organism, the more consequential these form-changing relational processes become. The scientific parallel. That maps well onto morphogenesis and developmental complexity. Higher multicellular organisms depend on exquisitely coordinated spatiotemporal regulation. Cell fate, tissue mechanics, polarity gradients, and chromatin regulation all have to align. Recent work in developmental biology increasingly links morphology to multi-scale coordination across time, space, and gene regulation. So the phrase morphologically advanced species could be translated as species whose form emerges from highly integrated developmental control systems. Okay. Now, number 4, the embodiment of the notion of intelligence features. This is awkward phrasing, but the likely root structure is embodiment, intelligence made structural or enacted, and features, traits, signatures, and capacities. My reading, this is ChatGPT, intelligence is being described not as abstract thought alone, but as something that takes form in structure, pattern, and coordination. Makes sense? The scientific parallel that resonates with emerging work in embodied cognition, morphological computation, and systems views of development, where form itself helps carry information and constrain behavior. In developmental systems, physical shape is not just the output of instructions, it becomes part of the control architecture. In that sense, intelligence features could point to organization principles embedded into matter and biological form. This is more of an inference than a direct scientific equivalence, but it is a coherent one. Okay, thank you, ChatGPT. All right, number 5. So, symbiotically coordinate with the facets of your reality structure embedded within the notion of time and space. Etymology. Symbiosis is living together, mutually interdependent association. Coordinate is arrange in relation. Facets is aspects, faces, dimensions. Time, space, temporal, spatial ordering. So this sounds like these structures co-develop with the conditions of reality rather than existing independently of them. Yep, that makes sense. Scientific parallel, that maps nicely to spatiotemporal developmental biology. Modern single cell and spatial omics research is explicitly trying to reconstruct how cells acquire identity through time-space trajectories. Development is not just genes unfolding, it's a coordinated dance of position, timing, mechanics, and regulatory state. The phrase could also loosely echo ecology or host microbe symbiosis, where organismal development depends on interaction across systems. So, you know what I love about this? I have to be honest, I don't understand what any of it means. I would have to go over it a few times, I think, to understand what it's actually saying. I've got a kind of idea, but what I love, and there will be some people who are intelligent enough to actually understand it. Uh, and what I love is, as I was saying, when he's presenting this information, he's kind of orienting us into a particular kind of science that is, I want to say, it's more quantum in its nature, or more malleable in its nature, or systems based in its nature. That's what it is. It's systems based. That seems to be leading us towards this reality where we recognize through science more of the whole, which is what we're missing in science right now. This is why we keep hitting walls and creating imbalances in the ecosystems and creating more problems for ourselves, is because we don't recognize the whole. And it feels like in this information is leading us towards the science and highlighting the science that represents that ideology of embracing how things work together and reducing the separateness between disciplines. And so it just feels very intentional on his part, and feels very positive on my part. I feel like as I continue to do this, and obviously I've had a break, I think all the time about where could this go? This system of channeling, analyzing, if there were people who are listening to this who actually understand the science on a deeper level, what could they really do with that? Where could they run with that? What ideas could be generated through that system, because it's just taking things, it's giving a perspective that comes from a higher vibrational state of consciousness that then we can kind of creatively work with. We don't have to take everything as fact and, well, does that align with my system and what I already know? We can play with it creatively and allow it to lead us towards new ideas and new solutions in society. Yeah. Anyway, so that's just me expressing what's going through my mind as I'm reading this. And at the end, there will be like if this all sounds a bit broken up into the different pieces, there will be like an overall analysis of what he's saying in general. Number 7, the sun is more dialectically structured to fit within a less intelligent system. I would treat this as symbolic, not scientific, but there is a plausible translation. Possible translation: simpler systems require more legible, centralized archetypal organizing forms. In other words, the sun may be invoked as a large-scale singular organizing center whose behavior is easier to grasp than a highly distributed intelligent system. The scientific parallel. The closest scientific language would be a self-organization under field constraints. Plasma systems can form structured patterns through nonlinear interactions, and developmental systems also generate order through constrained self-organization. So dialectically structured may be pointing to order emerging from competing forces under stable constraints. That's conceptually valid, even if the less intelligent system part is metaphysical rather than scientific. Archetypal form or archetypal expression. So we know what archetypes are. It's broken down what archetypes are. We know what archetypes are. So archetype literally means an original pattern or primordial template. The scientific parallel. It usually avoids Jungian or metaphysical uses of archetype, but the closest analogues are body plans, attractors, conserved developmental motifs, symmetry classes, or canonical patterning rules. I never thought of archetype in that way. Okay, that's interesting. That's a different direction. In development, organisms repeatedly generate robust forms from occurring regulatory or mechanical principles. In dynamical systems, attractors are stable pattern regimes toward which systems tend to evolve. So archetypal form could be translated as a stable generative template that produces recurrent forms across conditions. Okay, number 9. Its derivatives can emit a particular force within your system. This is where the language becomes very cross-disciplinary. Possible meanings: literal force in a physics sense, signaling influence in a biological sense, regulatory or informational influence in a system sense. The scientific parallel. The most defensible biological translation is not mystical force, but signaling outputs that alter other systems. Hormones, bioelectrical gradients, immune signals, morphogens, mechanical stresses, or electromagnetic activity. In developmental biology, gradients and force fields can absolutely override local behavior and reorganize pattern formation. In physiology, distributed signals can reorganize tissue state. So this line reads like higher order patterning influencing propagating into a system. Okay, propagation, we've had that before. You are here. Next one. Okay, the next one, de-embryonification. Now that was definitely one we needed to analyze. That word. This appears to be a coined or partially heard term. The nearest roots are undoing, reversal, removing, embryo, embryonic, early developmental form, possible, ification, the process of making. So I would phrase it as something like de-embryonification or removal from embryonic patterning. Best interpretation, This could mean the loss of a primitive or undifferentiated structure, the dissolution of an early template, differentiation, regression, or repatterning, the scientific parallel. There are real biological ideas nearby. De-differentiation, which is specialized cells reverting towards less differentiated states. Developmental reprogramming, plasticity, morphological remodeling, loss or rewriting of epigenetic memory. In developmental and stem cell biology, cells can retain or lose memory of previous states, and that memory can shape later differentiation. So de-embryonification might be Dimitri's improvised way of referring to the dissolution of an earlier developmental template, so a new one can form. Okay. Yeah. As I'm going through, I'm thinking, I wonder how all of this relates to the sun. I wonder what it's going to put together at the end. The disintegration or dissolution of which comes about in a bilateral form. That's the next one. He loves the bilateral. He loves to talk about bilateral. He's showing me the DNA helix, and as I say that, he's showing me that, and he's saying because everything is, because of how you perceive reality in that double helix and symmetry. He said everything is bilateral, so that's why. Etymology. Okay, disintegration, dissolution, breakdown of coherence or structure, bilateral, two-sided, mirrored, dual axes. The scientific parallel. This could map to bilateral symmetry, which is one of the deepest organizational principles in animal body plans. It could also refer more abstractly to transformation occurring through dual gradients, two-sided forces, or paired oppositions. Developmental biology often depends on axes and gradients that define left, right, anterior, posterior, dorsal, ventral, etc. So a bilateral dissolution could symbolically mean a restructuring along paired axes rather than random collapse. Okay. That's interesting. Number 12 is quite a lot. How many have we got? Okay, we're on number 12 and we've got 14. Encoded into your genetic awareness. This is a line where I would be most careful. There is no standard scientific concept called genetic awareness, but there are several nearby concepts. Gene regulatory networks encoding developmental options, innate predispositions shaped by evolution, epigenetic memory within cells and tissues, possible intergenerational epigenetic effects, which remain an active and in some areas controversial field, especially in humans. So the best scientific translation is not genes are conscious, but rather organisms inherit regulatory architectures that bias what they can sense, become, and respond to. In that softer sense, genetic awareness may mean biological predisposition plus inherited pattern memory. Yeah, I feel like ChatGPT is making it a bit more sciencey in that, and it doesn't want to bring in the idea of consciousness so much. Okay, number 13, we're almost done. That's like 30 minutes. Wow. Okay, the gravitational postulation that provides an example of the new malleability of a more plastic state. Okay, we won't do that because he's given me that. He said it's three different things, and gravity isn't real. I will have to find that and relate it to this at the end and see how it relates. So I will do at the end. I'll do a comparison with this and what he said about gravity. I haven't shared that yet. The postulation of gravity, he called it. Okay, all matter that is shifting evolutionarily. Okay, this is broad, but conceptually it resembles evolution as ongoing repatterning, not just a selection of fixed parts. Modern biology increasingly studies evolution and development together through evo-devo, gene regulation, chromatin state, and multi-scale pattern formation. The important shift in recent years is that scientists are paying more attention to how form emerges through dynamic regulation not just through static genes. That does not mean matter itself is consciously evolving in the mystical sense, but it does mean biological form is now understood as more processual, relational, and history dependent than older mechanistic models suggested. So the overall translation of the passage, it says, if I compress the whole thing into plain language, the overall translation of the whole thing together says there are outer or field-like layers of form that are not separate from matter, but are derived from it and shaped through relationship, transformation, and pattern. In more complex life forms, these transformations become more significant because intelligence is expressed through increasingly sophisticated morphology. These patterning processes coordinate with time-space structure and may be partly inherited or developmentally encoded. Oh, so it's saying plasma-like states and solar analogies are being used to suggest matter that is more dynamic, field responsive, and archetypally organized. That translation is not a scientific validation of the transcript, obviously. It is the most coherent bridge between the wording and existing science. The places where the bridge is strongest are the exoplasmic outer structured layer, cortex-like boundary, the dialectical transformation, the morphologically advanced species, time-space encapsulation, and genetic awareness, plasmic state. Okay. All right. The terms I would flag as neologistic. Neologistic, I have never heard of that word before. Or non-standard are exoplasmic morphology, genetic awareness, and especially de-embryonification. Those are not accepted technical terms, but they can still be decoded meaningfully through roots and scientific analogies. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So and to finish this, if anybody's listening to this, and if you've got this far, the thing about this is that I don't know any of this stuff. The phenomenal thing about this whole experience is that I don't have any scientific background. I have a master's degree in psychology and a master's degree in education, but the kind of information that you study in those is quite different to kind of biology, physics type scientific stuff. So the phenomenal thing about this whole experience is that he's communicating in his way, his scientific sort of way, about these scientific concepts that I obviously I don't know anything about. And I have no previous knowledge of this. I don't use that terminology. I only learned the word etymology when I taught psychology at a school, and the teacher, there was I think he was a philosophy teacher or something, but he would use that all the time. Let's find the etymology of this word. And all of his lessons were finding the etymology of words. And I remember thinking, what does that mean? Etymology. And now it's hugely important, obviously, in deconstructing these messages that I'm given. So there we have it. Separately, I'm going to look at the gravity thing and see where that may link in with this, as he said. I'm going to ask you now, Dimitri, do you have any final thoughts on what has been presented here? He said it is exactly as we planned it. It's 4:44 p.m. That's his number, is 444. I just got chills all over my body. I shouldn't be surprised, should I, by these kind of synchronistic, I saw a number when I'm channeling this information. But it still excites me. It's still like that confirmation, of like, everything's aligned, everything's synchronistically. Oh my goodness. And my iPad is on 44%. What are you doing, Dimitri? What are you doing? He said, we're playing a game with you. Yeah. Yeah. So I guess you are. It's a fun game. Okay. Anything else? Is exactly as we planned it. He says, we want you to lead the people to the information, not to define it for them, and allow them to creatively absorb the potential direction of, it's another word, homeobility. Homeobility. What does that mean? Homeobility. Homeobility, the ability to move while maintaining sameness or internal stability. Okay. I guess it makes sense. Movement that preserves equilibrium. Okay, so it's like adapting while keeping balance. So adapting to something new that's coming whilst maintaining the original structure of scientific exploration. See, what I love about this etymological, the way that he uses words, is that there's so much information packed into a single word, and it's never like slightly off. It's always so exact that he's saying exactly what he means. And it's because, I think, he's not actually using words from his perspective. He's not using words, he's using frequency. He's communicating through frequency. And the frequency is so exact that it brings about the word that is appropriate, or the combination. And he gets the combination of the word from somewhere in me that is, I believe, connected to my ancestry, perhaps, or it's almost like the culmination of, or maybe even the field of the collective field of awareness, that, the words are available there, and he's drawing them in so that I can use them, because these words are not words I know or use. Incredible. Okay, so I'm happy to be back doing this. I love this. I absolutely love doing this, and it just brings so much inspiration every time I do it. So yeah, there we go. And I'm going to look at the gravity, the relationship to the gravity next. Okay, so as promised, I said I would compare where he says that the description of the exoplasma parallels the postulation of gravity, which is a message that he gave me a couple of months ago. I don't understand physics of gravity, so it's a little tricky for me to actually understand what he was saying. And I haven't made an episode on that. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll go into it in a bit more depth. But basically, he said gravity isn't real. It is actually a division of three entities combined in form to deduce a monoplastic or a monoamenable, which, we can get what he's saying by both of those. That's something that can be changed. Structure, a monoamenable structure. So the three entities combined are form, bilateral coordination or coordinates, and an impermissible substrate. He says to define this is to note that there are gray areas in your understanding that, regardless if we explain, you will not understand the full picture. However, we would like you to consider variables beyond that which you currently have been presented with. And this is his whole thing. His whole thing is like, consider new ideas. He's kind of asking us to think creatively about our reality and how it works from a scientific perspective. And he's really giving me kind of threads of energy that have a direction, but he doesn't want to give me like a solid kind of, this is the answer, this is how it works, here you go. He's like, play with this and see where you get with it. Now, I'm playing with the information he's given me in the best way I can, because I don't have a background in physics. But people who know about this stuff, they could play with it and they could come up with new ideas, but it does require a creative brain. It requires us to be a little bit open-minded about, maybe reality isn't what we think it is. I think maybe scientists who are investigating the notion of consciousness are a little bit more flexible. So there's really that level of imagination and creativity in science that we need now, especially when we're dealing with how consciousness works, how energy works, how quantum systems work, because we need to remove the walls and the boundaries about, no, that can't work because we believe this. You know, the whole thing about expanding consciousness is about knowing that belief systems are just that, belief systems. They're not fundamental truths. They're not fundamental universal truths. And distinguishing between them and knowing that, okay, my reality is more malleable when I understand that I can change belief systems, and that will change how I experience my reality. And even down to like how I understand time, evolution itself, my nature as a human, some of the fundamental aspects of being, and my world. Even if we've had these beliefs for millennia, they're still malleable. We can still change them and experience a new kind of reality when we're able to embrace the notion of our existence as more creative and imaginative. So he says that, right? So form, bilateral coordination or bilateral coordinates, and impermissible substrate. That's what he says gravity actually is. And I get an idea instantly that it's about the coordinate thing is kind of about, more about electromagnetism, maybe. Because if you remove gravity, then you just have electromagnetism. That's the thing that keeps everything in place. It's kind of how things form in a quantum way. Anyway, I won't pretend that I understand it because I'm probably sounding more stupid the more I talk about it. Okay, so that's what he says, impermissible substrate. And he says to defy your understanding, as it were, and integrate new potential awareness for the activity of postulation upon the subject. Gravity is subordinate to form. That was the last, and I started to fall asleep after that because I was channeling very late at night. Gravity is subordinate to form. So form takes precedence. It's a bit like when he said the brain is subordinate to the heart. Gravity is subordinate to form. So form doesn't actually come from gravity. It exists in itself before gravity, which makes sense because if we remove gravity and we can move things without gravity, then form still exists without gravity, right? That makes sense. Okay, so let's break down what the Chat GPT is saying about the comparisons between the two, because I think that's quite interesting. Obviously, the gravity postulation was quite a short message. It wasn't very detailed at all. Chat GPT says, Dimitri isn't presenting two separate ideas. He's describing the same system from two angles. Conversation 1, gravity postulation, structure, coordination, and substrate. Conversation 2, exoplasmic morphogenic language, development, transformation, relational form. Okay, so the core claim across both transcripts, plasma-like states, matter that is more dynamic, field responsive, and archetypally organized. From the gravity transcript, gravity, a division of three entities, form, bilateral coordination, impermissible substrate. The synthesis is a plasmic state of being equals matter behaving as a dynamic relational field organized system rather than a fixed object. That's quite self-explanatory. This aligns directly with plasma physics, systems biology, morphogenesis, and field theory. So where the two conversations parallel is form versus exoplasmic structure. Saying gravity is subordinate to form and saying the exoplasma has a structured outer layer that mediates form, force, and interaction. So the parallel is that both describe form as primary, not force. And that links to emergent science in terms of morphogenesis, biophysics, and morphological computation. Morphogenesis, form arises from gradients and interactions. Biophysics, shape influences behavior, not just genes. Morphological computation, structure is intelligence. Interesting. Okay. So bilateral coordination versus dialectical transformation. He says that gravity has bilateral coordination and exoplasma has dialectical transformations, which is development through tension. Both describe reality forming through paired oppositions. The scientific alignment is left-right body symmetry, the DNA double helix, reaction diffusion systems, and opposing gradients, morphogens, impermissible substrate versus relational derivatives of matter, gravity, impermissible substrate, exoplasma, derivatives of matter, which are relational. The parallel, both point to hidden foundational layers that organize visible reality. Quantum fields, bioelectric fields, epigenetic regulation. Epigenetic regulation, okay. So quantum fields are not directly observable, bioelectric fields guide development invisibly, and epigenetic regulation is a non-visible kind of control layer that we have in our body. I'm starting as I'm engaging with this, what's coming into mind, which I'll just share with you, whether it's correct or not, on the right path or not. It is, he said it is that actually everything emerges from this like DNA helix. The DNA helix is like the source of everything, the source code. And actually all of our experiences, like as we experience reality, is like a house and a table and a chair and people, other people and things. Those are all things that are emerging from our DNA as an antenna. That is what's coming through, that somehow all of it comes back to the DNA. And even the DNA, if you think of it, of ourselves as like a soul structure, even that wouldn't be a physical, real thing that exists. That would be a projection of reality. But, to take it back to the first layer is to take it to the DNA. And actually the DNA governs more than just like bodily functions. It's like our entire experience of reality is governed by that DNA, which is why epigenetics is so important. I think there's more on that for another day. Maybe I'll go into that in another. He just said, yes, we would be pleased to do so. Okay. I was saying in my head, another episode. In another episode, I'll go into that. And he said, yes, we would be pleased to do so. So genetic awareness versus encoded structure. In the exoplasma message, he says, it's encoded into your genetic awareness. And in the gravity message, he says, structure precedes perception. So these parallel in terms of saying that systems inherit pattern recognition capacity, not just material structure. Yeah, he said that. Additionally, he's given me that idea in the hybridization episode that I did, where he was talking about botanical hybridization. He was kind of alluding to the idea that, like, as humans, if humans were to evolve or get to a point of extinction, if they were to be wiped out, then a new kind of human emerges. They would still have some of the old kind of structure of pattern of the old human. So the destructive elements that were within the previous population are carried forward. And so it's very hard to, it's not like a solution to just wipe out the entire race and start again, isn't a solution, because those patterns is actually much better to evolve humans into more healthier patterns so that they don't keep repeating. I mean, that's how it works in terms of how we live our lives, right? And if we have trauma patterns and, if you have like a bad relationship, you just think, I'll just leave the relationship. But the pattern is in there within you and you just repeat the pattern. So was kind of alluding to the idea that on an evolutionary biological scale as well, the new population would still have those old patterns ingrained in them, because those patterns are coherent with the field. They're not distinct to the representation of the new population. They're part of the field. And it's almost like as you engage in one part of the field, you automatically connect to whatever that is associated with. and therefore those patterns are still there. So interesting. Okay, so essentially what he's saying overall across both of these ideas is that this new kind of reality, and this is what he said before about humans, that we're becoming like water, that we're operating within a different state of matter, essentially. So here ChatGPT is saying that essentially both of them are saying that the plasmic state is a state where matter is actively shaping and being shaped simultaneously, which is interesting. And as I connect with that, I think of this quasi crystal almost like creating all of these patterns that almost look like liquid patterns forming and moving all the time. Okay, and across both messages, this state has 4 properties. It's field responsive, which aligns with plasma physics and electromagnetic structuring. It's relational, which aligns with systems biology and network-based development. And it's dynamic, which aligns with evolutionary morphogenesis and adaptive systems. And number 4, it's pattern organized, which aligns with attractors and archetypal forms. And again, I just think of a quasi-crystal again when I see that. So it's almost like he's giving me the way reality works through that model, you know? The hidden unifying principle, ChatGPT says, is that reality is not built from objects, it's built from relationships. That's what he says every single time. If you look at the idea of ratios over quantity, sacred geometry, all of that, it is formed through ratios. The ratios are more important than individual measurements or quantities. It's to do with ratios. Everything is to do with ratios, which is to do with the mathematics of relationships between things that we experience, the ratio. The way that energy forms into reality used to be through ratio, through relationships. That provides expansion or constraint. Transcript, the gravity message says structure emerges from coordination and substrate. The exoplasmic message says structure emerges from relational transformation. These are the same claim. In physics, these are fields organizing matter. In biology, these are systems organizing form. And Dimitri is saying that relational plasma is organizing reality. Interesting. Relational plasma organizing reality. The advanced insight is ChatGPT says the real parallel is this: gravity equals macro expression of the same relational dynamics that plasma expresses at micro plus biological levels. So plasma is the same as dynamic field behavior, morphogenesis is the same as biological structuring, and gravity is the same as large-scale relational coherence. The final synthesis is this: Dimitri is describing one unified idea across both messages. Reality is a plasmic relational system where form emerges from interaction, structure arises from opposition, intelligence is embedded in organization, and what we call forces are actually expressions of relational geometry. Wow, that's cool. That is very cool. And I think there are some kind of polymath type people who are they're getting it, I think. And it's interesting the way that Dimitri presents himself as being like a polymath, where he's pulling from physics, biology, chemistry sometimes, is pulling from different areas. And to top it off, the most important line, ChatGPT says, is a plasmic state of being, existing as a dynamically organized relational field where identity, structure, and transformation are continuously co-created rather than fixed. That's the evolution in our consciousness right there. That's where we're going. And you might hear that and think, yeah, I already know that, pretty much. I already know that. But we don't, as a collective, we don't. And our systems, our theories, our explorations, the way we live, all of that is not structured around that ideology. And that ideology is at the basis of our current evolution of consciousness is that ideology. Everything is shifting around that. And that, to me, that's just so if you, and you can see it, everything you look at now that would never fit into that ideology, anything that's not prepared to be more plasmic, to move, to shift, to adapt to different forms, it cannot survive. It has to collapse, and it's collapsing. And I kind of see it in the way that, all the systems collapsing now. I see it in the same way that fire consumes something, and it's the fire horse, right? The year of the fire horse. It's like I realized this year that I've always thought fire destroys things. It doesn't. Well, it does as well, obviously, but it makes the thing fire. The thing doesn't become destroyed, it becomes the fire. So, because energy doesn't just disappear, it doesn't just die, it transfers. So it becomes the fire. The thing that is consumed by the fire becomes the fire. And so these things in our existence are being consumed by the fire, but we are the fire. This higher state of consciousness is the fire. It's consuming all of the old, but it's that energy is still there, and it's ready to become something else. It automatically becomes something else. It doesn't die. It doesn't go away. The energy is not gone. Whatever we've taken from all of those structures and all of those systems that don't work anymore, that are collapsing, we think they're just dying. They're not dying. They're degrading in order to become the fuel or the food for new life. And they are integrated into the new, but they don't look the same at all. So they're providing, almost like flower dies, it rots into the soil, it provides nutrients for the new, almost like that. And I think through that lens, through that perspective, we can kind of have a bit more like rose-colored glasses about the whole thing, and be a bit more. It gives us a slightly more positive lens. Like, yeah, this is nature. This is how nature works, and this is how it's always worked. This is the fundamental nature of existence, and we're all participating in this journey together. And if you're able to kind of lift yourself out of the intense emotion for a time and lift yourself up a little bit to look upon it from a new perspective that's more aligned that's more, slightly more conscious, more about consciousness than physical material reality. I think it helps to have a level of acceptance. And obviously, I'm not saying that everybody is able to look at it that way, because people are in different situations right now. So there's some it will be very challenging for them to have an alternate perspective on what's happening to them in the world. But for those of us who we can hold that position and hold that frequency, and kind of bring in the new energy for the new state of being that we're going to embody as humans. So there we are. Happy Easter, everybody. And on that note, of course, Easter Monday, it's all about resurrection, isn't it? And wasn't that message just about resurrection? See, there you go. There's the synchronicity. I had to record this on this day because it had to be synchronized with that energy that was abound. All right. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much for listening.